The room was filled with laughter and the soft clink of glasses. Everything looked perfect, but something felt wrong. Josephine Astons sat quietly, her chest tight, her eyes searching the room. Then Herbert Astons stood up. The entire room went silent. His face was cold, distant, and without hesitation, he spoke. From today, she was no longer his wife. A gasp cut through the silence. Josephine Astons froze. Her mind refused to understand what she just heard. Around her, whispers began to spread. After everything she had done for him, this was how he repaid her. And just as the weight of it all began to sink in, the doors opened. Footsteps echoed through the room. Slow. Confidence. Then a voice spoke. He might want to rethink that. Before that night, nothing was like this. There was a time when Josephine Astons was not sitting in a cold, silent mansion filled with judgmental eyes. There was a time when it was just her and Herbert Astons, trying to survive in a world that did not care about their dreams. Josephine met Herbert when he had almost nothing. No wealth, no status, no powerful name behind him. Just ambition in his eyes and ideas that most people laughed at. People did not believe in him. Even those closest to him thought he would fail. But Josephine believed. While others walked away, she stayed. There were days Herbert could barely afford basic needs. Days when bills piled up and life felt heavy. And still, Josephine did not leave. She worked harder than ever, pushing through tired nights just to keep them going. She paid bills when he could not. She sacrificed her comfort so he could chase his dreams. She believed in him when he no longer believed in himself. There were nights she stayed awake, watching him work, quietly encouraging him not to give up. When he felt like quitting, she reminded him of who he was. When the world made him feel small, she stood beside him like his only strength. And slowly, things began to change. Herbert's ideas started to work. Small success came first. Then bigger doors opened. People who once ignored him began to notice him. The world that once shut him out slowly started to call his name. And through all of it, Josephine was still there, never asking for credit, never asking for praise, only hoping he would succeed. Because to her, Herbert was not just a man chasing success. He was someone she loved enough to build a future with. But sometimes, the people you help rise the highest are the ones who forget who held them up in the first place. Time has a way of changing people. For Herbert Astons, success did not come slowly anymore. It came fast. And with it, everything around him began to change. His small business grew into something powerful. Within a short time, Herbert was no longer just a man with dreams. He had become a CEO. His name started appearing in places Josephine never imagined. Big offices, expensive cars, and people who once ignored him now rushed to greet him. Their lives were no longer simple. They moved into a large house. Everything around them looked new, clean, and expensive. But somehow, the warmth they once shared began to disappear. Herbert changed too. First, it was small things. He stopped asking her about her day. He stopped smiling the way he used to. He became more focused on meetings, business calls, and powerful people who now surrounded him. Then it became worse. He started speaking to her differently. Short replies, cold tone, as if she was slowly becoming someone he no longer needed. Josephine noticed it, but she kept quiet. She told herself it was stress. That success was just changing him. That he would come back to the man she once knew. But deep down, she felt the distance growing every day. Even Herbert's family made things harder. They never truly accepted her. To them, Josephine was never good enough for a man like Herbert Astons. Now that he was rich, their dislike became even clearer. Their words were polite, but their eyes were not. They looked at her like she did not belong in their world. And Herbert did not defend her the way he used to. He stayed silent. That silence hurt more than words. Josephine was still standing beside him, still the same woman who believed in him when no one else did. But now, in the world he had built, she was slowly starting to feel like a stranger. And she did not know it yet. But something inside Herbert had already begun to change completely. At first, Josephine Astons tried to ignore it. She kept telling herself that Herbert Astons was just busy, that this was normal for a man running a growing company. That success always came with pressure. But deep down, she could feel something shifting. It started with late-night calls. Herbert would step away from her, answering his phone in low voices. When she entered the room, he would stop speaking, or walk away completely. His tone would change when he returned, colder, sharper, like she had interrupted something important. Josephine began to notice the distance between them was no longer just emotional. It was physical too. He was never really present anymore. Then came the secret meetings. Herbert started leaving the house more often without explanation. Sometimes he would say business. Other times he wouldn't say anything at all. When she asked questions, his answers became short, almost irritated. Josephine, not now. That was all she heard most days. And when she tried to speak about how she felt, the conversations always turned into arguments. Small disagreements became loud silences, and those silences became longer than their conversations. It felt like she was slowly losing him, without any clear reason why. Then came the whispers. Herbert's family never stopped talking. Josephine would catch fragments of conversations when she walked past. Soft voices that stopped the moment she entered the room. Eyes that followed her, then quickly looked away. There were hints, small, painful hints. A name she did not recognize. A woman mentioned once, then never again. Smiles exchanged when Herbert thought she wasn't watching. Phones quickly locked when she came closer. Josephine's heart began to tighten every time she noticed these things. She tried to ask Herbert directly, but every time she did, he shut her down. "You're imagining things. You're overthinking." And slowly, Josephine began to doubt herself. But deep inside, she knew something was wrong, because love does not feel like silence, and it does not feel like being slowly erased from someone's life. That morning felt different. Josephine Astons woke up with a strange feeling she could not explain. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that made her think too much. Every step she took echoed slightly louder than usual, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Later that day, Herbert Astons surprised her. He told her there would be a family dinner that evening. His voice was calm, too calm. There was no warmth, no tension, no emotion she could read. Just a simple announcement like it meant nothing at all. But to Josephine, it felt like something heavy had just been placed in her hands. Herbert rarely invited her to family gatherings anymore. And when he did, it never felt normal. Still, she nodded quietly. She told herself it was just another dinner. Another attempt to keep things stable. Another night she had to endure. But deep down, she felt it immediately. Something was off. Herbert moved differently that day. He was unusually composed, almost distant in a way that felt controlled. He did not argue. He did not avoid her. He simply existed beside her like a man preparing for something she could not see. Even his eyes felt different, like he had already made a decision she had not been told about. Josephine tried to speak to him, but the words never came out properly. Every time she looked at him, she felt like she was standing in front of a door that was slowly closing. That evening, they got ready in silence. No small talk, no connection, just quiet preparation for a dinner that suddenly felt too important. As they were about to leave, one of Herbert's family members passed by Josephine in the hallway. They did not smile. They did not greet her properly. They only whispered, so softly she almost missed it. But she heard it. "Tonight, everything will change." Josephine stopped walking for a moment. Her heart tightened. She turned slightly, but the person was already gone. And for the first time, she felt it clearly. This was not just a dinner invitation. It was something else entirely. The dining hall was already full when Josephine Astons and Herbert Astons arrived. The room looked perfect on the outside. Long polished table, expensive lights, and well-dressed family members sitting in silence. But the moment Josephine stepped in, she felt it again. That strange pressure in the air. No smiles welcomed her, only eyes watching. She slowly took her seat beside Herbert, but even that small comfort felt distant now. He did not look at her. Not once. The silence stretched longer than normal. Then Herbert Astons stood up. The sound of his chair sliding back echoed through the room, sharp enough to make everyone turn toward him. Josephine looked up slowly, confused by the sudden movement. And then he spoke. His voice was calm, but deadly. He accused her of things she could not understand. That she used him. That everything he had become was not because of her, but in spite of her. The words hit her like something she was not prepared for. Josephine shook her head immediately, her voice breaking as she tried to respond. She told him it was not true. She reminded him of everything she had done for him, everything she sacrificed, every night she stayed when no one else believed in him. But Herbert did not listen. He looked at her like she was a stranger, and then he said it again, louder this time so everyone could hear. "You're nothing without me." The room went completely silent. Josephine froze. Her breath caught in her chest as she looked around the table. His family did not look surprised. In fact, some of them looked relieved, as if they had been waiting for this moment all along. She tried again to defend herself, but her voice was shaking now. No one was stepping in. No one was stopping him. It felt like the entire room had chosen a side without saying a word. And then came the final blow. Herbert Astons announced it clearly. He was disowning her. Just like that. No hesitation. No emotion. Like their entire life together meant nothing. Josephine's world tilted. But before she could even process those words fully, Herbert turned slightly toward the side of the room. And that was when Josephine saw her. A woman she had never seen before. Elegant. Confidence. Sitting quietly like she already belonged there. Herbert did not explain. He did not need to. The silence said everything. And in that moment, Josephine realized this was not just humiliation. It was a replacement. The room was still heavy with silence after Herbert Astons' words. Josephine Astons stood frozen in place, her mind struggling to accept what had just happened. The faces around her blurred slightly, as if reality itself had become unstable. No one spoke. No one moved. It felt like the entire room was waiting for her to break. And then it happened. The sound of the doors opening. It was not loud, but it was enough to cut through the silence like a blade. Every head turned at once. Josephine slowly looked toward the entrance, her heart beating faster without understanding why. Herbert's expression shifted slightly for the first time that evening. Not fear, but recognition. Something unreadable passed through his eyes. And then a stranger walked in. Calm, controlled, confidence. He moved like someone who did not need permission to be there. Like someone who already belonged in the room more than anyone else did. The tension changed immediately. Confusion spread across the faces at the table. No one knew who he was. No one had invited him. Yet he did not stop walking. He came further into the room until he stood just a few steps away from the table. And then he spoke. His voice was steady, but it carried weight. "You've made a serious mistake." Those words landed heavily in the silence. Josephine blinked, confused. Herbert did not respond immediately. His jaw tightened slightly, like he was trying to control something. The family looked between each other, unsettled now. The confidence they had moments ago started to fade, because no one understood what was happening. Who was this man? And why did it feel like Herbert Astons had just gone completely still for the first time that night? The stranger stood there in complete calm, as if the tension in the room did not affect him at all. But now the silence had changed. It was no longer controlled by Herbert Astons. It belonged to the stranger. Josephine Astons watched closely, her heart still heavy, unsure of what was happening. Something about this man felt important, but she did not understand why. Then the stranger slowly turned his gaze toward Herbert, and what he said next changed everything. He did not shout. He did not rush. He spoke slowly, like someone revealing facts that could not be denied. He began with business details, things no outsider should know, hidden deals, secret agreements, transactions Herbert Astons had never made public, names of partners that were never supposed to be mentioned in a room like this. The family shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, Herbert did not speak immediately. His silence was different now. It was not control. It was uncertainty. The stranger continued. He spoke about decisions Herbert had made behind closed doors. Choices that built his empire, but not in the way people believed. Each sentence felt like a layer being peeled away. And then he touched something deeper. The past. Not the version everyone knew, but the version Herbert Astons tried to bury. Josephine's eyes slowly widened as she listened. The silent force that had backed his biggest deals. The hidden name behind the money that built his empire. The one person Herbert never allowed anyone to question. The room went cold. Herbert's expression changed instantly. For the first time, he looked shaken. But Jerome Cohn's was not finished. He turned slightly, and his eyes landed on Josephine. And what he said next made the entire room freeze again. Because Herbert's success was not just built by investment, it was built on something else. Jerome revealed that every key connection, every breakthrough opportunity, every door that opened for Herbert Astons, had one hidden reason behind it. Josephine Astons. She was the reason, not Herbert Astons. The silence in the room became unbearable. Josephine blinked, stunned, unable to understand what she was hearing. But Jerome Cohn's continued, slowly exposing the truth. The early support Herbert received, the unseen influence, the quiet help that came through Josephine's sacrifices, her connections, her unseen strength, everything Herbert Astons had now stood on her foundation. And the most shocking part was this. Herbert did not build his empire alone. He built it on the life of the woman he just disowned. Herbert Astons stepped forward suddenly, his voice rising for the first time in panic. But it was too late. The truth was already in the open. And for the first time that night, Herbert Astons was the one losing control. The room was no longer the same. Everything Herbert Astons believed in, everything he built his pride on, was now cracking in front of everyone. The family that once supported him began to shift in their seats. The same people who had nodded in agreement earlier now looked confused, even ashamed. Whispers turned into accusations. Because the truth had changed the story. Herbert's power in that room was fading fast. The confidence that once made him untouchable was gone. He looked around, as if searching for someone to support him. But no one did. Even the woman he had brought in, the one he used to replace Josephine Astons, slowly stood up. She did not speak. She did not argue. She simply walked away, out of the room, out of his life, and no one stopped her. Herbert's breathing became uneven. His voice, once cold and powerful, now carried something else. Fear. He tried to speak. He tried to explain. But every word sounded empty now. The same accusations he used against Josephine were no longer working. They had turned back on him. He looked at Josephine. For the first time that night, he truly saw her. Not as someone weak. Not as someone replaceable. But as the foundation of everything he lost. Slowly, his voice broke. He started to beg. Not loudly, not proudly, but in a broken way that filled the silence even more painfully than his earlier words. But Josephine did not move. She did not rush toward him. She did not shout. She did not cry. She simply stood there, calm. And then she spoke. Her voice was quiet, but every word carried weight. Now you remember who I am? The room went completely silent again. Because at that moment, it was no longer about the Astons' empire. It was about the woman he had underestimated from the very beginning. The room stayed silent. No one spoke. No one moved. It felt like even the air had become heavy, holding on to everything that had just happened. Josephine Astons stood there for a moment, still calm, still steady, even after everything. The same people who once looked down on her could no longer meet her eyes. Herbert Astons remained behind her, broken and speechless. But she did not turn back to look at him again. Not even once. Slowly, Josephine began to walk away. Her steps were not rushed. There was no anger in her movement, no need to prove anything anymore. With every step she took, it felt like she was leaving behind pain, betrayal, and a life that no longer belonged to her. The room watched her in silence as she moved toward the door. The same door where everything had changed. And when she finally reached it, she paused for a brief moment. Not because she was unsure, but because she had finally understood everything. Then she spoke one last time. Her voice was soft, but it carried through the room clearly. He thought he made me, but he forgot who built him, and with that she walked out, leaving Herbert Astons behind, and stepping into a future where she was no longer defined by him.